Hello and welcome to the latest Smart Betting Club podcast, where I'm once again joined by Chief Reviewer Rowan to talk about all of our analytical work at SBC Exploring Tipsters and the two most recent Tipster Profit Reports we have published. Now, so if you're someone who actively uses Tipsters, then you'll find this useful. But even if you're somebody who's curious as to whether using them might be right for you, perhaps you've never dipped your toes into the water, then hopefully this podcast will give you plenty of guidance and some examples of the tipsters to consider. So first of all, though, I need to welcome you back to the podcast, Rowan. How has your summer betting-wise treated you?
Hi, Pete. Yes, good to start talking again. Yeah, it's been good. I don't know, people possibly read the Bet Diary on the SBC website.
I hope so.
Follow it every week and says what I've been doing, and it's been a bit of mixed results, but overall, taking everything as a whole, it's been pretty profitable summer. So no complaints at all. It's interesting, actually. I've just recently posted about golf and how that's been largely below expectation and not performing quite so well, going through one of those spells at the moment. But then on the racing side, there's been some spectacular wins, which is always to be celebrated. So yeah, no complaints at all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And often it does smooth itself out like that, doesn't it? You know, I had a lot of, similar to you with golf, I've had a lot of seconds. Playoff defeats I had in the live golf. I had Lahiri, who lost in the playoff to Dustin Johnson. And these kind of things, they generally even themselves out, don't they, over time. But it's nice if you can have, if your golf isn't firing, maybe racing might be, or football could be.
Yeah, exactly.
Always balances it out.
That's exactly it. And it's interesting, actually. I think we've both been victims this past weekend because I had Ferguson. Was it Ferguson in the Maiden Himmerland, and one shot ahead as he finishes the 18, and then the chap Oliver Wilson behind him sinks to 60-plus putts of the last few holes. Just to edge it. And at the time I was watching on the telly, it was just in the build-up to the Arsenal-Man United game, which we won't dwell on whatsoever. But that put me in a foul mood before the game had even kicked off. So yeah, but it sort of balances out. You get the wins that are more fortuitous as well. And as you say, if you've got other areas that you're involved in, they do tend to balance each other out. So yeah, I'm not complaining.
No, well, I think you always remember the bad losses, the unlucky losses. But I can remember Harold Varner III, and he won, I think it was in Saudi in February, perhaps. Uh-huh. And he putted a ridiculously long winner. I think it was the challenge. Will he get it in two to actually get to a playoff? He actually got it in one. It was
I was on as well. Yeah, I do remember that.
It balances it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And who can forget? Was it John Rahm, who I wasn't on, but was on the golfer who ultimately did win the tournament. But John Rowan was about 6 shots ahead going into the final round, and then had to retire because he tested positive for COVID.
That's the one. Anthony Kaminskis brings that out every time. Yeah. Every time he has a bad luck story. Well, you call that a bad luck story? What about this one?
Well, it was good luck for me. I was on the winner on that one. So yeah, somebody's thinking a 65 put on the 17th. I guess we have to live with it.
Yeah, we have to, yes. So let's not dwell too much on the hard luck stories. And actually, it segues nicely into what we're going to talk about today, which is tips analysis, where we explore, we're not just looking at one or two results or weeks results or a month's results. We're looking at long-term performances of all the services we track, because we're trying to take, I would say, more of an investment style approach using, advanced metrics to find the best tipsters. And I think as well, the other point I wanted to make is we're not just always talking theoretical. We're talking about, actual real money. Can I get the bets on? Can I get the odds required? A bit like your Bet Diary, because that almost is the most important point for many people these days in the current betting climate, isn't it? Because you can have a tipster who has these fantastic results, but if they're quoting mythical prices, then it's a mythical service in many ways.
Yeah, it's all got to be relatively achievable, hasn't it? I think the gauge I always use is if I can, just by putting a little bit of effort in, if I can get pretty darn close to matching official prices and the official results that they advertise and claim and that we record, then it's a service with a lot of potential. And yeah, these Tipster Profit Reports breaks everything down for everybody, doesn't they?
Exactly. And I think as well, what we try and look at is, let's say we review a service, perhaps May 2019 or 2018, and we analyze it in depth at that point. Well, that's, if you're looking at it now in 2022, that's, informative. But what about what's happening in the interim period? And that's what these reports are there to fill in the gap, is to give people the information to say, look, we found all these interesting points and all these, the review discussed all of this, but here we go. Here's what's happened since then. Sometimes there can be changes to the service. There could be, perhaps there's a different tipster behind it, kind of rare, but perhaps there is a different staking plan. Perhaps we've noted they've expanded into other markets. And we're just trying to make sure that people have all of the latest information at their fingertips to make informed decisions about what happened, not just over like a month or 2 months or even 3 years or prior to just in terms of our review, but to give people that updated information, because quite a lot can change. And, we often will look at a service first of all, and we're going to talk about that in today's podcast. And we might look and go, we want to come back. We want to kind of see more results. We want to see how they perform over, another football season, or we want to see how they perform over the jumps rather than just the flat. And all of these things weave into making our decisions, don't they?
Yeah, so many factors to take account of, aren't there? And I've got to admit, I think on a personal level that writing the Tipster Profit Reports, the summaries for them, is actually the most enjoyable part of what I do with the Smart Betting Club. It's don't get me wrong, I really, really enjoy writing the reviews and writing the bet diary. But obviously, you see some of these services. You say that we could review them 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, and a lot can happen and a lot can change in that time for better and for worse. But even with the services that I'm not actually following on a day-to-day basis, but I'm still very familiar with, it's fascinating to see how they do on a periodic interval and to see how they're adapting, how they're changing, what they're doing well. Possibly if there's a service that's doing something not so well and becoming aware of that fact. It's just fascinating. It really is. And talking about what they have been doing and how they've been performing and how easy they are to follow or otherwise, I find it just a very fascinating part of the betting process.
Yeah, me too. I spent a couple of days going through each service in depth, looking at all the aspects of what's happened in recent months and, what they've said or any changes or anything I need to look at, sending emails, making phone calls, whatever it might be, to try to work out, how we can put forward the most informed ratings. So, without further ado, let's get into one of those services, because we've got what we call a Hall of Fame service. Where Hall of Fame is those that we wholeheartedly recommend. Often they have long-term results, or they all have long-term results. Like, I think the average age is about 4 years in terms of how long.
That, which is quite. That's how many services even last 4 years. Never mind, remain consistently excellent enough to be able to get into the Hall of Fame over that sort of period of time. It's incredible, really.
It is, and it speaks to the fact that if the service is good, we don't need to rush into give it a recommendation. We can wait, because if they're good, they're still going to be around in 6, 12 months. And if they're not, well, we haven't lost anything.
Yeah.
They're given up all of a sudden with no particular expectation that they'd stop. Then perhaps something's changed for them, and I'm glad we haven't got our money on. And
I would bet good money, Pete, that you're like me, and I will admit to this. And I reckon everybody's done this if they've been involved with betting for any length of time. Then people must have fallen foul to the latest bright shining star to rise in the betting skies and be blinded by it, end up following it, and then 6 months later, 9 months later, even if that long, maybe even 3 months later, it's not even operating anymore. You see it happen time and time again. And I must admit, in years past, I've fallen victim to that trap. So that's just for the benefit of that. I think the Hall of Fame is a marvel.
Well, it's like the the shiny new service, the silver bullet service, the service that hasn't had a losing month, the service that's got potentially very lucky. It hasn't, maybe looks like, oh well, I can follow this service. They've got phenomenal results. It's because they don't have a particularly deep record, or they've never dealt with a challenging time, or they've never dealt with the issues of getting on, or too many people trying to follow your bets. These kind of things, which sometimes can leave a service, facing a puzzle that they don't know how to solve.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, we're going to talk about one that's Hall of Fame. Say, Hall of Fames do it's 4 years plus generally the average time, and it's a service called Racing Consultants, and it's one that we first looked at, I believe, back in May 2016. We first reviewed it. I think that was when we first started looking at it. We reviewed it a few years later. And so this is a long time going in terms of the Hall of Fame rating, isn't it? They really have had to prove themselves.
A reward for patience.
Exactly. And I think what we found with the service, this one that has adapted and evolved. I think when it first started, it was a duo. It was Rory Delagi and I think his partner in crime at the time was Dave Massey, I think his name is.
Yeah, that's right.
I think he's still operated in the racing space, but no longer on the racing consultants. And I think since it's been run by Rory solely, and he's somebody that comes with a very strong reputation, and I think he does podcasts and articles elsewhere. We were basically saying that we want to see some more consistency. I think they fairly hit and miss in the first few years. I think they only made a small profit over a couple of years. They started off well, then they've kind of flatlined. And we thought, we need to see more consistency. And we have that since then. In the last 4 years, the ROI has been just short of 15%. But more than that, it also the way they put their tips forward and when they put them out. So the tips don't go out until late morning after 11 o'clock. They're well written up and standout prices aren't quoted. So at least 2 major firms off the odds checker matrix need to be offering a price for it to be quoted. So again, talks about what we said at the top of the podcast there about they're not just taking the top price and quoting and settling at that, because you can't realistically always obtain that. And if you did, it could open up problems for you with your account.
Huge problems.
Problems, yeah. And it seems to me, if you're interested in what we do, and this is a really good example of why we're patient, why we use the metrics that we do, why we try and ask for the highest standards possible and the best performance we can get. And sometimes perhaps that challenges services to change things or to really focus on what matters to their subscribers. And here we have a service that really I feel deserves a Hall of Fame rating. And they're fairly affordably priced. I would dare say, it's £25 a month if you do the monthly tariff. And you can save 20% on that with SBC membership. And the returns, have been very good compared to that. So I'd be surprised if you can, you certainly on the results that we've seen, you could easily make a good profit and without having to bet at high stakes.
Yeah, and that's important, isn't it? And there's so much to like. And I guess for the Hall of Fame service, you would expect there to be different factors that are all very positive. But yeah, if I'm looking at a service and I think, right, okay, is this one that potentially suitable for me to follow or for somebody else to follow if we're writing about it? Certain boxes need to be ticked, don't they? First of all, profitability. Well, as you say, we've been tracking their results for a number of years. The performance figures have become consistently high. So that's that one big tick in one big box. But then it's just what you said, what caught my attention there is what you were saying there about the tips being out late morning. It's always after 11 o'clock when the markets have formed. And if a service is performing at 15% ROI over the long term and they're issuing bets at the time where the markets are relatively mature, I think that's a massive, massive plus point for it. I think I've spoken to tipsters actually, and they say, look, if I release my advice, my bets the night before racing, I'd be getting 30% ROI without too much hassle. But of course, how long would that be sustainable for a follower to maintain? It just wouldn't. You'd find your accounts being closed down very, very quickly. You just simply wouldn't be able to get on. So if they're releasing bets at that time and performing well, and it's only, £20 a month, and there's a 20% discount on the service for SBC members, you can see how the full package starts adding up, can't you? And as to why that service should be in the Hall of Fame.
Exactly. And I think there's the level of frustration. There's nothing worse than missing out on a winner. And there's nothing worse, I feel, that if you had a tipster that was putting up prices that you couldn't obtain, whether the odds moved quickly or you just didn't have that one bookmaker account. And then they have that winner at 20 to 1. You think, well, they're talking about this 20 to 1 winner. They keep telling everybody how well they've done. And you think, well, I can't obtain those prices. And I feel that it just makes the subscriber and the member or the person following that service just feel so frustrated and left out. Are they doing something wrong? Is the tipster doing something? That all these thoughts will go through their head and they could conceivably just walk away, understandably so.
Those sort of circumstances you're talking about there, it wouldn't need to happen many times for somebody to get really frustrated and just think, well, I'm just not bothering with this. I can't get the results. Having great results sort of shouted about from the rooftops and I'm not on board. So why would you stay?
Exactly. It's a criticism I hear regularly of tipsters, people that come to me and ask me questions. And sometimes it's the question like, I've tried XYZ approach. I've tried these tipsters. I've been let down. I felt shortchanged. And I try and explain to them, well, we try and do things a little bit differently here. So, you're not going to find, we try and make sure that if it is a service where odds move quickly, they're not tipping, we're not recommending limited tipping into markets that don't exist. Yeah. If we are recommending them, we do so under the proviso, well, the markets are there. You have to be quick and you have to get on. And I think I was going to mention this at the start, really. Some of the things on the Hall of Fame recommendations of the service we talk about, they're not all going to suit everybody. Everyone's needs are different. Someone that might want to follow a tipster that puts up just 2 or 3 bets a day. Some might have the capacity to put 20 or 30 bets on a day. Some people, in terms of the bookmakers or the prices or what have you, are all going to be different. So we're trying to find services that we're not going to put something in there if we don't feel it's good enough. But equally, there are different options for different people. And you therefore just choose the ones that suit you. And it might be that racing consultants don't do enough volume for you, or you don't even have the racing accounts for them. If that's the case, then there are other options for you. But that's a key point, I feel.
That's the overriding impression I get now, actually, from writing the summaries for the Tipster Profit Reports, that there are so many services now that are very much on the SBC radar and being monitored, and all the information that members are provided with. Nowadays, it can find services that suit your particular requirements. And I think that's not always been the case. I remember a few years back, certainly when I started out, there was good tipsters out there. Of course there were, but there weren't. I don't think there was as many. I think that the tipster landscape was completely different. And I think that the standards of professionalism perhaps weren't what they are now. That's not to say there aren't a lot of not fashioned word, but I'm not saying there aren't a lot of charlatans out there. I'm sure that we know there are. But there are also now, I think, a good number of services that we can very confidently recommend. And if you have a certain personal circumstance or preference in terms of the sort of service that you want to follow, they're out there. And you can read about them in the Tipster Profit Reports now.
Exactly. And one that perhaps we had focused on a fair bit recently is winner odds, the tennis tipster, the tennis AI, tennis, shifting sports here onto tennis. And, there's plenty on the SBC blog, and I'll actually put some links into the show notes for this episode for people interested in finding out more. But one of the key things I wanted to talk about with winner odds is the value of the return on capital metric, and why that matters. And I think it was Graham Down, the late, a wonderful guy, wonderful analyst when it comes to form analyst after all, who coined the phrase that I still use: ROI for show, return on investment for show, ROC, return on capital for dough. So the idea being as well, the return investment, sounds nice. 50% return investment, but return on capital is actual, money in your back pocket, actual how much dough you're actually making. DOUGH, not Homer Simpson's favourite beer. And that's so important, isn't it? And return on capital is where the likes of winner odds really thrives.
Yeah, so winner odds, it's a fascinating service, actually, isn't it? Obviously, it's a tennis tipster, but the sheer turnover, the volume of bets that they provide lends itself to a high return on capital figure being attained. I think one of your members has written a good article to show just that, haven't they?
It has, yeah. It just popped up on my social media feed the other day. He sent me a message as well. I think he started on the 27th of July, and by the end of August, he turned €1,000 bank. And I think he'd made €1,012 profit from 500 or 560 bets or something like that. Like I say, I'll put the link in the show notes. And I post it on the SBC Twitter feed, social media feed, if people are interested. And obviously, he's taken over 500 bets in a month. So what's that, 20 bets a day or something like that?
Yeah.
So it's a high volume. It appeals to people who have that ability. And he's been logging in, he told me, like 10 to 15 bets times a day. And he gets an alert when he has a bet. And he has to be relatively quick. But he also knows that he has different options available to him to get on. He was from Austria, so he's got different accounts that are available to him, and he's able to get on. And it talks about some of the figures, actually, and the importance of return on investment and return on capital. Average odds, I want to talk about the figures for winner odds. And these are the average odds that people have used who've actually placed the bets. They've actually made about 7% ROI, but their return on capital is over 10 times growth. So 2,000 would have made a profit of £20,000 during that period after costs. So that shows you how much that bank has grown. And then we compare that with the likes of Ben Coley, who we'll talk about later. Now, his return on investment is huge. It's 55% over the same period. But his return on capital is only 122%. So 2,000 has made a £2,448 profit after cost. So the profit is 9 times greater, but the return of investment is 7% versus 55%. I think that those figures helped compare and contrast the differences and why return on capital, as Graham said, is the big one for dough.
Yeah, Absolutely. If you want to make a lot of money quickly, then obviously the focus should be on return on capital. It's interesting. I mean, there are pros and cons to each, aren't there? I mean, you pit two services essentially at the opposite ends of a scale, haven't we? I think with golf betting, because obviously the volatility that's involved, backing at very long prices more often than not, we have to make sure that our betting banks are stable, strong enough to withstand some pretty nasty drawdowns at times. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think winner odds are playing at the sort of odds that Ben Coley is likely to be doing.
Exactly.
And you do still have those losing runs, of course. I think sometimes there's a bit of a misunderstanding. I mean, take winner odds, I haven't got the details in front of me, but I'm sure as eggs are eggs, they will have had their losing runs and losing spells. It's just that because the turnover of bets is so rapid that you come in or you fall into those drawdowns and then you climb back out of them in terms of time so much more quickly. So I know with a golfing tipster, it's really not unusual to have 3 or 4 or 5 losing months on the trot, and then you'll make all your profit over the course of 4 weeks in 1 month. But you take the 5 or 6 month period as a whole, and for the vast majority of that time period, you've been in a state of drawdown. Whereas with something like winner odds, where those bets are coming through, as you say, 20, maybe 25 bets a day, even the worst drawdown in terms of time, in terms of number of days it covers, isn't actually going to be that long, is it? You're going to recover very, very quickly in terms of days spent. So the 2 ways of skinning a cat is what I'm trying to say here, aren't they? You just have to accept that these are 2 services, not just concentrating on different sports, but have completely different modus operandi in how they operate, how they work, how it's followed. They're completely different, but both bring real advantages to people who wish to follow.
Yeah, so exactly. A couple of good examples there of different approaches to it. And we're going to move on to talk about another topic. We're going to talk about Hanbury Racing. It's another racing tipster. But the interesting point about this service is some of the things that came up in the weeks prior to, only recently actually, prior to or looking at, should we apply a Hall of Fame rating? Because on the face of things, it's ticked a lot of boxes. So we've got over 2 years worth of tips, I think over 1,700 or so bets, and our ROI advised prices of a fair ROI as well. These aren't prices that particularly move, of 39%. We also found that it made a good profit at Bet4SP and even Betfair's live market prices, yet we decided not to apply a Hall of Fame upgrade for a few different reasons. This goes to not just looking at results, but looking at all aspects of a service, like the customer service, the transparency. And on this front, we just felt there's a couple of concerns with Hanbury, didn't we, this time out?
Yeah, taken in isolation, I think they're very small things. And I think the first thing that we should absolutely emphasize here is there's no question of any sort of deliberate wrongdoing by Richard, the chap who runs Hanbury Racing. But at the same time, as far as we're concerned here at the SBC, if you're going to be invited into the Hall of Fame, then really everything has to be just right, doesn't it? Everything from performance through being able to get on. And transparency is clearly an important issue. And there were just 1 or 2 items that we just felt that possibly that level of transparency could be improved upon. But I think, Pete, from the messages we've swapped, you've approached Richard, and he's taken on board the suggestions that you've made in this respect.
Yeah. So to explain, so what Richard was doing was he set up a profile for his service, Hanbury Racing, and that's how we've reviewed it. It's all the only service we're aware of. But he was also on the Tipster platform, which is TIPSTRR platform. And he was under different names. So I think it was like, I don't know, it's 123 Racing, RBTL, or something like that, reading between the lines. And he told me, look, he was set them up as a way of putting up different tips, and he was using this platform because they have a different audience and maybe he could generate a bit more income. And he decided, actually, after a while, he decided he was going to just put up Hanbury's tips, and certain ones with write-ups, certain ones without, and different approaches. He has he has Hanbury Racing, he's doing another one called Hanbury Winners. He's trying to pick out at different price ranges. But the issue was people weren't aware of the fact that he was Hanbury Racing but tipping under this different name on that platform. So not really, like I say, he hasn't done anything wrong. It was just that transparency aspect of, well, there are other, I went on their Tipster website before and I was like, oh, he's on there. And I could see a few other services with their own name, the name I'm familiar with, on there, selling their bets through that platform. So again, they're taking the same approach. Perhaps they have a different audience that might bring them income from other clients that they wouldn't necessarily be able to access or receive income from. But the fact that it was a different name, we only found out when someone contacted us really and said, "Oh, are these the same people?" Maybe there was concern that someone else was ripping him off, which has obviously happened before.
That does happen.
It does happen.
Yeah.
I did speak with Richard, and I think he's disappointed because he was expecting a Hall of Fame upgrade. But as I tried to explain to him, our loyalty isn't to him and his business and his service. Our loyalty is to people listening or Smart Betting Club members, and giving them the most fair and independent ratings and best assessment that we can. And I think we always go back to what we talked about earlier. If the service is good, there's no rush. They're still going to be here in 2-3 months' time, which they should be if they are good. Then that's fine. We'll come back to it then, and could well be that we see nothing else of issue, no other issues that transpire, and let's move ahead. And we keep seeing, we got more data and we can upgrade the ratings. But just right now, it doesn't feel like we're in that position, does it?
I think it's a good test for a tipster too, isn't it? I mean, look, nobody's expecting anybody to run the absolute perfect service right from the off. But I think the expectation that we have, I think you just mentioned it there, that we're not here to champion the cause of the tipster. We're here to champion the cause of the consumer, aren't we? The potential subscriber or the member of that service, and make sure that if we're recommending anybody, and particularly if a service has a Hall of Fame membership, then that is ultimately the very sort of strongest recommendation that we can provide, isn't it, really?
It is.
But it's a good test for tipster when something like this happens, because if they listen to the suggestions that you're making, which you're making on behalf of SBC members and the consumer, and then they take that on board and possibly just adjust slightly, well, then that to me says a lot. That to me tells me, okay, well, here's a tipster who really cares for their customers and for the image that they are conveying. They want to be professional about things. They don't just want to be able to provide a profit. That bottom line results obviously are very important, but they also want to provide a really, really good service. So if they listen and they take things on board, and I'm sure there's some dialogue and debate and points of view across, et cetera, which is all very healthy and fine, and then they move and they make those small alterations, then there's nothing precluding them from a future Hall of Fame invitation, is there? Having said that, if a tipster was to become very affronted by something that, to any sort of logical point of view, is a perfectly reasonable thing to mention, then that to me would cause alarm bells to ring. I'd be thinking, okay, what's their real motivation here? Are they really in this for the long term? Are they really that focused on their customers? Or they just want to quick in and out, make as much money as they possibly can, and then possibly disappear into the sunset? You know what I mean? To me, that this is an important thing, that communication between ourselves and the tipster, and how the tipster responds to that communication, that tells us an awful lot. And from everything you've said, I think Richard's taken things on board, hasn't he? And looking to make small changes to make sure that transparency, very small in isolation, that small transparency issue go away.
Exactly. He certainly has. That's the impression I have. And the words I'm getting back from him, the impression I have is that, he's disappointed, but kind of understands and respects our opinion, and seems to be making some changes. I think there's been, adjusted the names and what have you. So it's always illuminating to see what happens. I've had to have difficult discussions in the past with some services about our ratings, and on the whole, generally, you get, like I say, a respectful reply, but sometimes you might not, and it's then you think, oh, thank God I didn't take this further, or just as well I made the decisions I did, because clearly acting in this manner isn't particularly professional. Not that obviously Richard, that's separate, he isn't doing that, but I have had experience in the past like that, and it just made me think about another service that we removed from the Hall of Fame. This report, not for any reasons of poor form, although they had a below par season last year on the national hunt, but just because they're changing their strategy and they're not 100% confident that what they're going to be doing is going to be scalable and long-term profitable for everyone to follow. Now, I'm fairly confident it will be, but from their perspective, they're being honest. They're saying, look, I can't charge for this, or I'm not going to take on new members. I'm not going to pull the wool over people's eyes and put up tips and take the approach and just hope I'm going to be okay, but I'm going to be straightforward. I'm going to explain what I'm doing. And then if it works, it works. But for now, it's kind of just seeing how things go. And with that in mind, we have to remove that Hall of Fame rating, even though we really highly recommend this tipster, or we used to highly recommend him. It has done ever so well over the years. But sometimes that is the evolution of a service, isn't it? And that even, we have to remove that rating, even though we highly recommend them, because it's just not in that position where we can say this season, put your money down on this particular service.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a prime example of somebody that you trust, worked with for a number of years, has put together a fairly spectacular performance record over the years, who is going through a tougher time of it and having to adjust. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you were talking earlier about, or certainly I was, about consistency in approach of a tipster. And that's something that obviously we place a lot of value on. But at the same time, tipsters also have to evolve, don't they? Markets change, and a tipster to maintain an edge has to take those changes into account. And as I said, you do exactly that, evolve over time. And that's sounds like what's happening here, isn't it? That, for whatever reason, last year was proven to be a disappointing one. So, right, okay, let's have a look at this. Let's explore and examine and analyze the reasons why, and then move forward again. But in moving forward, let's just take it easy. Let's just not get everybody jumping on board and putting their hard-earned money at risk until I'm 100% confident that we're back on track. That to me seems eminently sensible. Yeah, obviously you can't have a Hall of Fame rating attributed to somebody who's going through that process. But to me, it speaks volumes for them. They're doing it for the long term, and let's see how they can make it work.
Exactly, and we don't want to risk people's money unless we're fully confident in the strategy or tipster that we're advocating clearly. And so that's it's good to clear that one up, because I think it just talks about the challenges each month and each report and things we look at. And sometimes that's the type of thing that the casual observer wouldn't be aware of. So being able to perform this analysis and get under, go under all the topics that matter and trying to find out, what's actually happened here. We can put some semblance of analysis on it and give an update and make things as clear as possible where it might not be previously. So I also wanted to talk about Hanbury, and I said about the Tipster website. What I found really interesting about this is the difference in profits through our proof methods, whereby we are looking for at least free tipsters to offer a price for it to be quoted, and that of that Tipster platform with the 2 R's, whereby on that platform they allow the tipster to quote a price if just one bookmaker offered it. So with a service like Hanbury Racing, who picks out big prices, it does make a significant difference. A 6% ROI boost, actually, on their records versus ours. And when you look at the type of odds, if that's, say, Hanbury's putting up a bet that we settle at 40-1 because 3 bookmakers are offering it, but one firm is offering 50-1, that bet wins. Well, that's a significant jump in profits, isn't it? 50-1 versus 40-1. And if you were taking that 50-1, well, you do run the risk of your account, whether it be bookmakers looking at how it compares to the market. Inevitably, they probably have stats that say we were the top price and the only firm offering this price. It could be Bet365, who often take a...
Yeah, it's one of the big no-nos, isn't it? If you're taking consistently standalone prices, then your account, the days are numbered, aren't they? That really is one of the big no-nos.
I definitely think so. And if you... whether it be they compare it to Betfair SP, they compare it to what was available in the market at that point, especially if that price is going to tumble down through the support from other people following the same bet. I just think it's a really important point to make, because people might go, we don't proof Tipsters website. I don't have any contact with them necessarily. I think we had discussions previously. They weren't able to do it for whatever reason. It's over to them. But even if we did, I imagine as a review team, we'd be looking at this going, well, it's quoting a 20% ROI, but how realistic is that? We'll do our odds tracking, but if we see a 15% drop within 15 minutes, well, what's the point? And it just, unfortunately, it creates that issue for people when they go to other sites, when they look at it and they think, can I trust that record? And it's difficult for us when we looked at it. So how much work are we going to have to do to find out what the true accurate pricing of this service is?
Yeah, all this work is for the benefit of the reader, isn't it? But yeah, this is a theme that's run consistently through this podcast, isn't it? About achievability of results. And clearly, yes, you can't have a situation where a tipster is allowed to pick out one outstanding price. Because even if you were to get it consistently, as I said before, you're not going to be able to do it for too long before your accounts are restricted. And I think the other thing to take into account here as well is that once your account's gone, it's not just that tipster that it affects, is it? It impacts every tipster that you follow, or tipster if it's a horse racing. If you wanted to cover 2 or 3 or even more racing tipsters, and 3 or 4 of your accounts have been closed down pretty rapidly because of the policy in terms of quoting standout odds from one. It's not just that one tipster that's going to be impacted, it's going to be the rest of them too.
Yeah, and bookmakers are especially wary of horse racing, it's fair to say. I think they view it almost these days as a gateway drug to get people in and then get them on the casino.
That's a really good way of putting it. I've not heard it described like that before, but that is absolutely spot on. Yeah, it is. You're right.
They get people hooked on their accounts, and then they go, oh, you're interested in horse race, but how about having this free spin on my roulette table or my slots, whatever it might be.
Here's a tenner. Have a tenner on the roulette table or whatever it is. Yeah, absolutely.
100 free spins where the maximum payout is £5 or something like that. All the offers that they try and push to people.
Yeah.
And they are wary of horse races. So if you're just betting on horse racing, even if you're actually trying to place a few spins in the casino to try and throw them off the scent, it's still, they're going to look at the horse racing and go, well, you can limit you on that. You can win a £5 at maximum, but you can get as much as you want in the casino. And they aren't really interested. They view racing as something that is a potential big loss leader for them from someone who's sharp, and you have to be careful. So if you are doing some really sensitive betting business, like taking top prices like that on horse racing, it's a lot worse than it might be if you're taking, Asian handicaps, or if you're taking other markets whereby there's liquidity in the market and perhaps they're not quite as sensitive to it. It's just something to bear in mind that, especially with racing, you do need to be mindful.
Yeah, the way I look at it is you're trying to merge into the crowd, blend into the crowd, aren't you? And not stand out to the extent where the traders are looking specifically at your account and saying, right, what's going on here? And look, and let's not be foolish about this. Ultimately, if you make a profit for a period of time, that in itself is going to make you stand out. So ultimately, account restrictions are coming. That's going to happen, but that can be delayed and avoided as long as possible. And if you're taking standout prices consistently, then you are standing out like a sore thumb. You're certainly not blending into the crowd.
And actually, the appeal of someone like Hanbury is how well they do on Betfair, the live market. You can read that we did a couple of reviews and update as well, and how those odds stand up. Not just at Betfair SP, because I know people look at Betfair SP, but also in the live market. You can very often get really good returns. It's taking live market prices. And while we can't have a comparative metric about what everyone took at 1 p.m. or 1:30, because everyone's going to be different. It's the live market. But, with the information at your fingertips to know where the value might lie and what kind of price range to look for, you've got a 40% ROI. So you conceivably have got a fair bit of rope to play with there, in terms of the price.
Yeah, there's a margin there, isn't there? Yes.
There is a margin, exactly. Yeah. So that's something we do look at. And that's why we actually really like Hanbury, one of the other reasons, because they're picking up bigger prices. So there isn't the demand on those prices in the Betfair market for the 50 to 1 shot. The money's coming for the second favourite or whatever it might be.
It's a great angle.
Yeah. So let's talk about long shots. Let's talk about Ben Coley, the Sporting Life's golf tipster, because he's a guy who picks long shots, and he's had a really good 2022. Actually, our results, because we published our sports Tipster Profit Report at the start of August, so they don't actually include. He had a 200 to 1 winner recently.
Yeah, bad timing.
Yeah, bad timing. But that'll be in the next report. And I think he had a 33 to 1 on the Corn Ferry last week. We recorded this start of September.
Who cares about 33 to 1 winners when you can bat 200 to 1 winners?
I know. And I think it's David Lingmerth on the second week of the Corn Ferry playoffs, the people the golfers trying to get the PGA Tour card. And I believe he was something like 7 or 8 shots up and going into the final day. I could be wrong, but I think he won by 1 shot in the end. It was definitely a bum squeaker, as Alex Ferguson would term it. But I think we talked about golf earlier and the small differences between winning and losing. And he deserves that because he's had some on the other side of that. Certainly, there's a few prior to that. I think he had some narrow defeats. But long-term, Ben has a great record, doesn't he? I think we did have a 23% ROI from 2,500 bets. So it's likely upwards of 25% now.
Yeah.
And he continues to thrive, which is why we performed the updated review last month. You wrote that. What did you think when you were reading about Ben's numbers?
I'm thinking that the educated bettor now is what a time to be alive, because you've got somebody with a long-term record, as you say, hovering around that 25% ROI mark, and he's free to follow. I mean, how good is that? all you've got to do is log onto the website when the tips come out and you're away. No other front costs at all. So yeah, as I say, what a time to be alive.
The one thing I wanted to talk, a couple of things. One of the things I wanted to talk about with Ben is odds. He has a winner and people jump on the bandwagon and think, oh, look, he's picked, the 200-1 winner and then a 33-1 winner. So surely this week he's going to have another winner. Well, he's picked up Victor Hovland this week in the BMW Championship. Now, Victor Hovland, when he gets to the first tee on Thursday, hasn't got a clue Ben's tipped him. And he has had a winner last week or the week before.
Do you not think he reads his column? He might do.
He could do. The little I know about Victor Hovland, I don't think he cares about much. But certainly that. And there is no... You can understand sometimes if you're backing the same team or the same horse and it's running the same course and the same distance and the same track. But these are different events. They're independent events. And sometimes people go overboard on staking or they become too confident. Or they think, I'm going to follow him for a month because he's red hot. And it's like, well, no, he's just... This is a new event. It's not connected in any way. It's a different course, a different field, different country, different continent, potentially. And it's that mindset of, and that's one thing, because sometimes you do find there are more people following him in, so the odds move quicker, or the bookmakers are wary of it because they've got so much new money following in his tips. I don't know how...
Recency bias, I think they call it, don't they? If you're impacted by that, somebody's done something very recently, you put more emphasis on it and they're more likely to do it again, which of course is nonsense.
It is nonsense. And I think something to bear in mind if you're a seasoned gambler, person that follows tipsters like we do, or you're somebody new to it, don't be blinded and just think, I'm going to follow the hot guy. I'm going to give him a month or 2 months. You're just going to lose money doing that.
Yeah.
If you're going to follow Ben, you're going to stick with it, because in that review as well, you picked out a 12-month period and it was quite a challenging period at times. It was profitable.
Yeah.
But I think there was a period between January and May of this year where he had lost 40 points. And what I was going to say before, he was up for this year, or over that actual 12-month period between June 21 and May 22, which is the period you talked about in the review, he'd made 345 points. So those 5 months lost 40, so the others contributed the profits. But if you only followed, January to May and you went, 5 months, I've only lost money, you'd be feeling quite foolish right now.
How many people do you think, I reckon there'll be a fair few who, as you were talking about, jump on after a winner or a couple of winners thinking, this guy is red hot, I'm lumping in there, probably start staking a little bit too highly, inevitably go through those losing spells that you've just described there, very quickly either give up or reduce stakes and then give up or whatever. And just at the point they stop is when, after 3 or 4 months is when Ben suddenly hits 1 or 2 winners. And within 2 weeks, you make all the losses you've suffered and then make some profit on top of that at a pretty good rate as well. There must be loads of people who do that. This is something actually I remember, was it not Tom from Bookie Bashing was talking about? So I think his service, Weekly Golf Value, went through a similar, he did because I was following, a similar period, and he was saying how he feels sorry for the people that jumped on after the last of the winners for a fair amount of time. And then he was talking about people giving up. And Tom's obviously a nice chap, he felt sorry for them, but ultimately, and this sounds really harsh, but we'll fool them in many respects, because if you're going to jump on a Weekly Golf Value or a Ben Coley, the nature of the sport, as you just said, different events every week, all sorts of different factors being taken into account, you've got to just think, right, okay, I've got to accept that there's going to be periods of time where I'm either treading water or I'm losing money. But I know if I look at that long-term record and see how they've been consistent in their approach to this game, and the profits will come. And sure as eggs are eggs, they do, don't they? Mm-hmm. And I think Ben very much falls into it. But there must be hundreds of people, thousands of people who'd fall into that trap, I reckon.
Well, it's important to state as well, like Ben works for Sporting Life, who are owned by Sky Bet, as part of Flutter. And people might question, quite rightly, and they should do, why is somebody who works for a bookmaker tipping up so many winners? And what the reality is, effectively, people that go and bet with these firms, they're going to be profiled. And the goal is to, those people that don't fall into that category of those people that follow for a month or two then drop off after a few losers, which they're banking on you doing that. Yeah. And if you don't, you're still going to get a lot of some leeway if you're having losers, obviously. And what they expected is you're not just going to follow Ben. So the money that you maybe make backing his tips, you're going to lose elsewhere, like in the casino or in other sports where you don't have an edge. So it's something to bear in mind, the motivations of the websites behind it too, because it's all geared towards getting you in and then filtering you. Like a trawler, you chuck out the fish that you don't wish to catch, and then you keep the ones that you want and then you filter through them. That's how they operate. So they're banking on that from the bookmakers banking on that because it's, like I say, we talked about recency bias. We talked about an ability to stick with it, an ability for bankroll management, which is obviously something we provide, all the information on that. So I just wanted to highlight that point because with Ben, you lose more months than you win, I think. So I believe he's got, actually maybe slightly more now, 62 months or 63 months when 33 are profitable. So yeah, you win more, just over 50% of the time in terms of
it's going to be 50. It's going to be around that level, isn't it? 50-50.
It is. But it's something to bear in mind because, the worst run for Ben saw him lose a drawdown of 344 points between April 2018 and July 2019.
I'm wincing here.
Yeah. So we're talking about him. He's kind of approaching 3,000 bets, 26% ROI probably right now. Great. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to make a fortune. Oh, hang on. There's no guarantee. There was people that started in April 2018 knew. Well, there's no guarantee. They had no idea. They just assumed he was doing well. He was prior to that. And then, after July 2019, he rocketed up and picked a bunch of winners. But you just need to have that bankroll and that patience because in terms of number of bets, it probably, it's April 2018 to July 2019, you've got a 15-month period there, 16 months in totality. And it's probably not that many bets. It's probably a few hundred, maybe 300 bets, which isn't that many when you're backing it.
Pretty small sample.
80 to 1 average price. So, yes, so bankroll management's key. And also the other things we've talked about. Ben is a Hall of Fame service. We really like him. You can get on with Betfair. You talked about in their review as well. You just have to be aware of how to break down top 5, top 10 markets as opposed to taking an each way bet. And his prices do seem to rebound as well. So if he puts up a bet on a Monday night, the price might go in a little bit, but generally, sometimes, not always, but often you'll see that price will go back out. If not with a bookmaker, because they have significant liabilities perhaps, but with Betfair and other firms whereby they don't have those liabilities. Let's say Ben puts up a tip at 150 to 1 with Betfred. Now, Betfred are probably going to take a ton of cash on that. They're not going to want to take any more money on that golfer, so they'll keep him really low. But other firms might be able to take that liability still, be able to. So go check that out because we have the update on Ben, all the information on tipsters like him and all the others we've spoken about. And I think, across both Tipster Profit Reports, we've got sports and a horse racing one out. So sports betting is everything non-horse racing, tennis, football, golf, all that kind of stuff. Plus the racing. We've got 54 tipsters in there, 27 sports, 27 racing. So there's a lot to go through, isn't there? There's lots of services to choose from.
That is one thing I've noticed actually, Pete, I'll tell you from writing the Tipster Profit Report summaries, is compared to how it used to be a few years ago, they're a lot longer now. There's so many more services that we're monitoring.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for us both to do, but
no, I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. It's all good stuff. It's just it is really notable that I'm 27 of each between racing and sports. That's a considerable number.
And we have filtered a few out. I think every month we take a few out whereby we're just not seeing anything, or there's too many problems, or the results are just not hitting the strap. So we do filter out and try and focus on the good. So before we wrap up, actually, Rowan, thank you for coming on. I wanted to, one of the questions I get, where do I get started? I'm listening to this, or I'm trying to re-engage with following tipsters, used other services, and want to try the advice that we provide. What would you give us one bit of key advice to get people going?
Yeah, become an SBC.
Aside from that, take that as a given.
There's so much information out there, isn't there? But no, breaking it down. I think my advice would be you don't need to launch into this in a huge way. You can start small and grow, and I think that is so important actually, because I think psychologically it's so much easier to start off with relatively small stakes, just almost feeling your way before gaining in confidence as you can see the results come through and the profit starts going up, and cumulatively over then 3 or 4 months you can say, oh gosh, this is really good, I'm running at a really good return on investment, whatever. You go through losing runs, of course, but you're not losing that much in terms of actual cash because you've kept things small. But to do that, you need to make sure that you're not spending a fortune on subscription fees. But we've talked tonight about Ben Coley, who's free racing consultants, I think £20 a month, and you can get a discount off that for being an SBC member. By keeping those subscription costs down, there are some great services out there that do not cost an arm and a leg. In fact, many don't. So my one piece of advice is start small, keep things on a cost efficiency ratio, which is going to be really strong, and take your time. You can read all about these. You just mentioned it 2 or 3 times through this podcast that they're really good services. You might be itching to jump on, but they may cost a bit more money than at this stage you could afford. So why not just take your time? They're still going to be here. They're still going to be churning out good results in 6 months, 12 months' time, and you can start growing and expanding. So my one piece of advice would be start small, choose the right tips to suit your personal circumstances, and keep your costs down, and you really can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. I'd also actively encourage people to look at the free tips like Ben and others. We've got some in our Tipster Profit Report. There's got quite a few that we provide with SBC membership. So Kieran Ward's got a really good service. Yeah. We've got the betting man's come on for a few months. I've got a few more that are going to be coming out soon alongside a few existing ones that have great records. We've got a European basketball guy doing stuff with Pinnacle that's good. So there's options out there. And especially if you're new to it, you don't need to pay £100 a month when you're working off a budget or starting off relatively small to see if it works for you to make an expensive mistake. Just start small. And we've been around for over 16, 17 years now at Smart Betting Club, and we'll be around for at least a few more. I don't know if 16 or 17 years. Who knows? We'll be doing virtual reality podcasts or whatever by that point. But the theory is, yes, there's no rush. There's no rush. And I had an email from someone today asking me a question about something similar, like, should I spend £400 on a golf tipster when I've got £1,000 bank? It's like, no, don't do that. Go and choose some of these cheaper ones. Get started like that. He was very new to it. I was like, learn about what each way markets are. Learn about what bankroll management is. Learn about the variance of play. Learn about, odds availability. Learn about things that matter to you and what you can handle, what you can't, what you like, what you don't like, how much you like to bet, where you like to bet. So many different variables that are going to be unique to you. I mean, I do a lot of bets within shops. I don't place them myself, but I have people who do. It works for me and I'm able to get on. But that means I can't take certain strategies and certain things don't work for me. But that's fine, and I tailor it to what I can get on and what I'm able to do and what works for me in my time. And everyone should do the same. So
there are options. There really are options, aren't there? I can't. Everybody has different circumstances. Everybody has a different demands on their time, different times of day, whatever. But if you take some time to read the reviews, read the Tipster Profit Reports, you will find options that suit you. It's impossible not to.
Exactly. So go check them out if you haven't already. Go have a read about the information on the website about Tipster Profit Report. They're both sports and racing are out now. Access them with a Smart Betting Club membership, and there are obviously discounts on many of the top tipsters. We've got a few, especially with the new racing profit reports coming out early September, which are unique to that. Like we talked about the 20% off racing consultants, there are others as well. And we've got some free tipsters too that I mentioned there as well. So Rowan, thank you ever so much for your time. I wish us both better luck on the golf moving through September into the autumn. I think we're due. I've had so many seconds lately. It's just the way of the world sometimes with golf, but you always remember, not just with golf, but other sports, narrow defeats, shall we say. And but that's just the way it goes. And so, I wish you extra luck. And you can always read your thoughts in the Bet Diary, can't you, each week?
You can. Monday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. There you go. Thank you ever so much, Rowan. And thank you for listening. And I hope we've inspired you to get started with Tipsters.